I'm Paul Wasco. I know many of you here who are here in the library. Others are joining us remotely. Give you a little background on this conversation. I was having coffee with Diane Hirschberg, and we were updating each other on the portfolio project. So I came back in January, and I've actually been leading the portfolio project since January. As many of you know, because some of you are on the committee, we are in the process of negotiating with the vendor now in terms of providing a portfolio infrastructure for the university. Well, let me connect up portfolios, Creative Commons, and open education resources. So if you're wondering why the heck is Paul Wasco talking about Creative Commons and open education resources, let me give you the bridge. This topic pops up in the portfolio in the sense that, and I'll pick on you if that's okay. So you do this wonderful presentation and you want to use it as a showcase within your portfolio. That's great. It's perfectly appropriate to include it in the portfolio. But one of the things we are fighting and encouraging people to do is to think about how might that be shared with other individuals. So now it's curated in your portfolio. Are you going to allow people to reuse that? Are you going to share it with colleagues around the country? So when you think about the idea of sharing within your portfolio, it comes back to this question of, well, how do I license, how do I manage this intellectual property? Creative Commons provides one of those ways that individual can start managing their own intellectual property. Creative Commons says, Deb, you're willing to share this with other people around the country. They can take it, use it, repurpose it, and ideally it's something that they could then add into in terms of the broader education body out there. So as I'm talking with Diane Hirschberg about this, and many of you know Diane as faculty senate, Diane says, this is a great topic. We need to spend more time within the university community talking about Creative Commons, open education resources. What can we do with it? And in talking with her about that, I said the person that I worked with back where I was in Minnesota who understands this topic best is Cable Green, our Creative Commons. Cable and I have met a couple years ago. Cable is by far the go-to person on kind of a national and international level when it comes to Creative Commons and open education resources. A couple years ago, we actually had Cable come in and present before a K-20 Education Technology Summit in Minnesota. The reason we look for people like Cable is, could you find a speaker that would come in that would be addressing topics appropriate for K-12, higher educations, the library community, and the like? And so Cable fit the bill. Not only did Cable fit the bill on that, Cable was actually a repeat speaker. So in the history of our event in Minnesota, we already had one repeat speaker. It was Cable. And in fact, during his first presentation there was not only well received, but I actually had members of the audience whooping it when Cable was going through his presentations. I have never actually attended a formal education event where I actually have audience members whooping it up over what Cable was representing. Bottom line, Cable is a great individual to kind of share with us what's happening in terms of Creative Commons, open education resources, and potentially setting the stage for some of the conversations here. As you look at his bio, you'll go back, you'll find out he's done a lot of work in Ohio with Ohio State, the Ohio Learning Network, came over to Washington State, focused on some of the OER questions and opportunities in that state. He frequently meets with faculty senate, college presidents, governors, legislators, the whole shebang. And so I consider him a friend and colleague that I'm very proud of some of the work he has done. So with that, Laura, is there any sort of logistic things we need to be aware of? Otherwise, can Cable just get in and start speaking and presenting?
Yeah, so for the logistics, basically you just walked in. This computer is you can see yourself when I talk, showing Cable the room, doing a little walk here. I can hear myself twice, so you have to fix that. The other people that are watching from their computer are broadcasted, and they have a Q&A button, which I will make live in just a second. And if you have questions, you can come either here or to this podium if you want to raise a little there. We'll kind of fill out the Q&A from this hall works best.
Right.
Go on.
Thank you, Laura. Cable, welcome to the last frontier, at least virtually.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back in Alaska. Is my audio okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Is that better?
Okay, and you can see me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, hi everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Paul, for such a nice introduction. Given that we have about an hour, I've actually got another call with a big platform about a Creative Commons integration in about 55 minutes, so our time is short. Because of that, I think it's probably best if I don't do a kind of a talk at you slide deck. If you want that and to have some face-to-face meetings, I've offered. I'm happy to come up to Anchorage. I've got some family in town, and I love to fish. And I'm particularly, as a Northwest boy, I'm very fond of salmon, and nobody does it better than you all. So if it's ever useful for me to come up, just let me know. I'm happy to come. But for today, I thought that maybe I could baseline some of the ideas of open education, talk about where the world is at this point, give some examples from not only around the United States but internationally, to talk a bit about Creative Commons licensing and its role in it, and what's happening at a policy level in states and countries. There's also, if you're able, it would be helpful if your university could send someone next week. I know this is short notice, but there's an open education conference in Washington, D.C. If this is the global, kind of the big global conference around open ed. If you can get somebody there, that's great. If you can't, you might want to think about sending someone to Banff in Canada. This is in April, I want to say, at the Open Education Consortium, and that's universities from around the world who share their course content under a Creative Commons license. So with your permission, I thought it might make sense to, maybe I'll take 10-15 minutes and then stop, and let's talk a little bit. So if you would, I'm going to put some responsibility back on you. Start thinking about some questions you'd like to ask. It could be on anything at all, and where you have confusion, where you think there might be barriers to thinking about raising awareness of, adoption of, creation of open educational resources, and we can talk through those things. And then if you want to go big, I'm more than happy to help you do so, and I'll just hop on a plane and come on up. So does that sound okay, Paul? Fair game?
Campbell, that's a great way to begin the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's see where to start. I guess the best place to start is to say that open educational resources is not a new idea, and that it's 10, 12 years old, but that is a new idea in the arc of the history of higher education. So a big study just came out from Babson Research. So if you just go to Google and type in Babson OER research, you'll find it. Big study came out that said still approximately 75% of faculty in U.S. higher education institutions do not know what open educational resources are. They can't define them, and if they do know what they are, they still have trouble finding them, etc. So that goes to show you that we have a long way to go just in conversations like this and awareness raising, because it's still a relatively new idea. 10 years old isn't that old in the academy. So that being said, OER is 10 years old, Creative Commons is 10 years old. These things have been around a while. So what are open educational resources? Let's talk about definition, and then why do they exist? Why are we talking about them? Why are we having this conversation right now? So open educational resources are it's anything you use in education. It's the textbooks, the courseware, the videos, the audio, the curriculum, the academic research. It's all these things that we use for teaching, learning, both in traditional and non-traditional environments. So it's all the stuff we use. That for it to be an open educational resource, it has to have two characteristics. It must be free, as in no cost, so you must be able to access it for free without going through a paywall somewhere, and you must have the legal rights to modify it, to make changes to it to make your needs, or to repurpose it. So getting very specific on that, so it must be free, and it must either be in the public domain, or it has to have a Creative Commons license on it or some similar open license, which allows you to do 5 things. And we refer to these as the 5 R's. So you legally must be able to download a copy for free for your students, for yourself, for any use you want to make of it. And you must be able to do these 5 things. You have to be able to reuse it, use it exactly as it is, revise it, modify it, change it in some way, remix it, so take it and something else from over here and something that you created and mash it together into a new remix. You must be able to redistribute it, so that new changed thing, I get to share it with everybody else on the planet. And I also, the 5th R is retain. So I must be able to keep a copy. So reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, and retain. Now, these things may sound obvious, things that you say, well, of course, I want to be able to do that with an educational resource. But in fact, if you think about the educational resources you use in your classroom, if they were bought from a commercial publisher, usually a textbook publisher, in fact, you don't have those 5 rights, or at least 3 or 4 of those rights on most of those resources. So can you access a $200 textbook for free? No, so it's not free, therefore it's not OER. But what about the legal rights? Can you reuse the book exactly as it is? Well, sure. If you've bought a copy of the book, you can reuse it. So you have that legal right. It's something called the first sale doctrine in the United States. Says if you buy something, an artifact, you can use it for whatever purpose you want, and you can resell it to somebody else. So reuse, yes, you can do that with a commercial work. But the other ones, not so much. So revise, are you allowed legally to revise an all rights reserved copyrighted textbook or piece of curriculum? No, you can't. You don't have the legal rights to do that. Can you remix it with something else? Can you take parts of this and mash it together? Not into a new work. That would be violating the copyright on the original work. One of the ways that faculty do remix today, because they're limited with the legal rights they have, is they will assign 4 or 5, sometimes textbooks, to their students, and they'll use parts of each book. So, hey students, I want you to buy this book, but we're only going to use chapters 2, 3, and 6. And what faculty are doing is they're remixing different parts of books together. Of course, the students get frustrated because they had to buy the whole book, only using parts of it, and then when they go back to the bookstore, of course, if they're able to sell it back at all, sometimes they're not because the versions have changed, but if they're able to sell it back, they usually get 10 or 15 cents on the dollar, and they don't get back certainly anywhere near the full amount of what they paid in. So remix is difficult. Redistribution, do you have the legal rights to make copies, 1,000 copies of that textbook and share it with everybody at Anchorage? No, that would be copyright infringement. You're not allowed to do that. And then retain. Are you allowed to keep the thing that you bought? And this is especially problematic, and there's very low awareness on what's happening in the marketplace right now, and you need to be thinking about this at Alaska. So in a world of printed textbooks, in a world of printed curriculum, yes, you could retain it. So a student would buy, yes, the textbook was expensive, or yes, the curriculum was expensive. Usually students are buying the textbook in a bookstore. If they wanted to keep it forever, they could, and nobody could take it away from them. The new model from the commercial textbook publishers is actually to go digital, and to put digital rights management or technical protection measures on those digital works, essentially to destroy the used textbook market. So the new model you'll be seeing coming to the University of Anchorage that the publisher reps will be talking to faculty about is they'll come into your offices and they will say, good news, we know that the high cost of textbooks is a problem for your students. By the way, faculty at Anchorage, 60 to 70% of your students don't buy textbooks, all the textbooks for the course that you've assigned. So they're coming unprepared for your learning environment, which we'll loop back to. That's a problem in and of itself. But the publisher reps will come and they will say, good news, we know that the average cost of our top 50 books is $175. Now, good news, for a semester, it's only $90. So big savings, close to 50% savings over what it was before. Sounds great. But what they're not telling you is that the new model is that the students will not own the book; they will lease access to the book in the same way that you would lease a car. So at the end of your lease, you don't own the car; you have to give the car back. At the end of your textbook lease, at the end of your semester, and you've paid your $90, the book goes back. You don't get to keep a copy. And so think about that just from a philosophy of education standpoint. Is it okay in the 21st century where we have an abundance of information, an abundance of digital resources on the web, and we have created a model by which we strip resources, educational resources, away from learners at the end of a short period of time? So another way to think about it, if a student is in your advanced algebra course and they're going to go into pre-calculus next semester, do you think that it would be useful for them to hang on to their educational resources about algebra? Probably so, I would argue. But the new commercial models say, well, that's fine. You can have access to advanced algebra, but you have to keep paying a lease fee in perpetuity to maintain access to those resources. So a bit long on the 5 R's, but OER is really important for all those reasons. It's certainly important for the cost reason. Your students at University of Anchorage pay on average $1,000 a year for textbooks every year. So for a 4-year bachelor's, but we know that your students are not graduating in 4 years. They're closer to 5 or 6 years. So they're spending upwards of $5,000, $6,000 at Anchorage on textbooks. And then when they come out with a bachelor's degree from your institution, their average debt load hovers somewhere between $26,000 and $27,000. $5-6 grand of that debt is in textbooks, and so it's a significant part. In your community colleges in Alaska, it's much higher. Textbooks are a much higher percentage of the cost of going to school because tuition, of course, is lower in the community colleges. So that's a bit of what OER is. So OER has to have those two components. Must be free, and you must have the legal rights to do the 5 R's. If you see something that is free but you don't have the legal rights, you don't see an open license, or it's not in the public domain, it's not OER, regardless of what people tell you. So you'll hear, the MOOCs oftentimes, Coursera in particular, oftentimes will say, yes, we have open education. Well, it's open access, right? It's free to access, but if one of your faculty members at Anchorage tomorrow wanted to download a Coursera course and it doesn't have a Creative Commons license on it, in fact, you're violating the copyright of whoever the copyright holder of the course is, some university. And you're doing so without permission, and you would be subject to U.S. copyright law violations, which can be very expensive. They can be up to $25,000 per infraction. And you've got legal risk on you and the institution. So whether or not you've got legal rights to do, so another way to think about this, the importance of this is, do you, the faculty, do you, the instructional designers, do you, the e-learning team, the e-portfolio team at Anchorage, have the legal rights to do with the educational content that you need? Are you, as faculty, able to modify, remix, redistribute resources not only freely but legally, so that you can create the sets of resources that you want specifically for your students in your class? If the answer to that is no, then I would say you're using the wrong educational resources. Okay, so enough about OER definition. Let me back up a few steps. How did we get to even having this conversation about OER? So roughly a decade ago, the world changed for us in education, and it will never go back. And what I mean by that is we have a new set of tools that allow us to think differently about educational resources, how they're built, how they're maintained, and how they're shared, and with whom we share them. What changed is that we went digital. So roughly 10 years ago, the cost of computers started to fall. Roughly 10 years ago, the internet came into its form that we're all familiar with today. Roughly 10 years ago, mobile computing took off. Roughly a decade ago, Creative Commons started, so we had a legal way to share. I'll talk about CC in just a minute. And what what all this meant was that not just in education, but in music, in the arts, in museums, archives, government data, you name it. As things go digital, the economies of the digital things change fundamentally. So look no further than the music industry to see the disruptive force on what digital can do to an existing business model. So the most powerful music company in the world is no longer Capitol Records or Tower Records that wants to sell you CDs. Those folks have, Tower Records is out of business. Capitol Records is hanging on by a shoestring. The most powerful music company in the world now is Spotify, which doesn't create any music. It's a distribution service to your mobile device, right? So why did that happen? Because the market fundamentally changed, because once music went digital, you could make copies, you could store it, and you could distribute it for near zero cost. Now, we could talk about Napster and privacy and all that, or piracy, but what that led to was a fundamentally new market. In education, the same thing is true. Once an educational resource is built, so yes, it costs a lot of money to build a new textbook, and that's still true. It costs a lot of money to build a new course at the University of Anchorage. That's still true. That will always be true. And it costs a lot of money to maintain a course or maintain a textbook or maintain other educational resources. But what has changed in the costs of educational resources is, because we've gone digital, it now costs nothing. And when I say nothing, it's not quite zero, but it's so close to zero, we might as well call it zero. And I'll give you the real numbers. But it costs nothing to store digital resources. It costs nothing to make copies of digital resources. And it costs nothing to distribute digital resources. So I used to work at the community colleges in Washington State 4 years ago. We built our entire general education curriculum out of existing OER, and where there were gaps, we built our own OER and put a Creative Commons attribution license on all of it. All of those resources, it was very expensive. It cost us about $1.5 million to build it all. There's probably $300,000-$400,000 a year spent updating those resources. But it's work we would have done anyway, and it's budgets that we already had to build our general education curriculum and to keep it updated. I mean, that's the business of, if higher education isn't in the business of having really great gen ed curriculum for its students, then we should probably hang up our hats and go do something else. I mean, that's core to what we do. What we did, though, is we moved to OER for our general education curriculum, and we did it for ourselves. We didn't do it for Alaska or for Louisiana or New York. We don't care about any of you. We care about the 500,000 community and technical college students in the state of Washington. But because we can store all that content for near zero cost, we can make copies of it, or essentially allow you to download it, and we can distribute it over the web, all for essentially free. Why wouldn't we want to share it? Right? There's no disadvantage. In fact, only good things have happened to Washington State by sharing their curriculum. So for those of you who have tablets or computers in front of you, just go to opencourselibrary.org or go to Google and type in Open Course Library, and you'll see the highest enrolled 81 courses in Washington State. You can just download them. So those are I refer to those as the affordances of digital things. You can store, distribute, make copies of digital things for free. Says anybody on the planet who has the copyright to anything. So if you hold the copyright to a piece of music, to a movie, to a textbook, to a course, whatever it is, Creative Commons lets you keep your copyright and share with the rest of the planet your work under the terms and conditions that you choose without giving up your intellectual property. So I want to repeat that. You keep your copyright and you share with everybody else. And you don't need a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer to share. You don't need a lawyer to use it. You don't have to call me up and ask permission. We don't have to write a contract. It's a priori legal permission to A, use it for free, and I'm giving you the legal rights you need to do the 5 Rs. That's OER. That's Open Educational Resources. And so 10 years ago, UNESCO and OECD and Creative Commons and educational institutions around the world, starting with MIT, said, "Wow, we gotta use these tools. We have to think about what education means with this new toolkit." So MIT was the first one. MIT's faculty took a vote and said, you know what? We're educators, and education is about sharing. Education is about sharing knowledge. Education is about putting your best work out there and making it open and let others critique it and make it better so that we can have better courses for our own students. We at MIT think we produce some pretty good content, and if somebody else around the world can make good use of it and we can share it at the marginal cost of zero, not only ought we do so, but we have a moral and ethical obligation to do so. And if we can take the cost of textbooks out of our courses, by gosh, we should do that as well. And now it's not just MIT, there's over 200 universities around the world that have followed MIT's lead. Some of them are sharing all of their educational resources. Some of them are sharing just a department or two. Some of them are just sharing a few courses. But this is taking off. You've got systems of education out there like Washington, which have its general education curriculum is now open. You've got the Tidewater Community College just launched, in Virginia just launched an entire online business administration degree, where not only all the content is open educational resources, the course itself, but all the textbooks are open as well. In that degree program, it saves their students about $4,000 in textbook costs. The $1.5 million investment in Washington State has already saved students upwards of close to $20 million in textbook costs. Your ePortfolio project, if you want students to be able to reuse and revise other people's works, or you want the university to have the right to use a student's portfolio into the future, the student, who's the copyright holder of all that work, has to give you a license to do so, and that's what a Creative Commons license is. So a decade ago, a bunch of us sat back and said, wow, we now have the technical ability to share with everybody on the planet for the marginal cost of zero, and we have the legal ability, and that doesn't cost us anything either. Creative Commons licenses are free, so we can legally share with everybody on the planet. As educators, what do we do with that? Should we start to share work that we're producing? If other people are willing to share their high-quality open educational resources and we deem it to be high quality, should we start to use other people's works? Is there an opportunity to save students a lot of money? Is there an opportunity for faculty around the planet to start to form up communities of practice around physics courses, around statistics courses, around calculus? Every university in the world teaches calculus. Every community college, technical college on the planet teaches calculus. Not to say that we should all teach the same thing. We shouldn't. Academic freedom should always reign supreme. But is there an opportunity to share our good work? Because at Anchorage, you might want to take, a sliver of the calculus course that we created in Washington. You might want to take a little bit of that MIT calculus course. And wow, look, that UC Irvine just released their entire chemistry department under a Creative Commons license, and calculus is a prereq for their program, and they've got their calculus course open. Is there some good stuff out there that you might take and reuse at Anchorage? And so we started asking these questions a year ago, and people like the United Nations started saying, you know what, for the first time in human history, because we can share at the marginal cost of zero, and people are starting to do that, we should do that. Never before have we been able to say that anybody on the planet can have a fair shot at accessing and using high-quality educational resources. Couldn't say that before. When things were print, forget it. Way, way too expensive to print everybody a copy of an open textbook if it's in print. Way too expensive to put it on an airplane and ship it all over the planet. Way too expensive to do these things because the costs of the supply chain are just too high. Storage, replication, and distribution are very expensive when you're dealing with physical artifacts. But when you're dealing with digital stuff, almost zero. And so people started doing it. So we've been doing that for a decade. So let me put a marker in that one. That's one thing to think about. That's what OER is. That's why people are doing it. That's why you might want to do it at Anchorage. So what does that actually mean? How do you do that today? So what faculty are doing, what you might consider at Anchorage is, before you assign that next textbook, you might want to take a look at open textbooks. Take a look at OpenStax. It's OPENSTAX with an X. And go to OpenStax. This is coming out of Rice University. Rice has putting about $500,000 into each one of these textbooks. It's all foundation funded. Textbooks are all free. They're under a Creative Commons attribution license, which means you've got full legal rights to do anything you want to do with the books, including sell them, which, I don't know, you'd have to be pretty stupid to buy a book from you guys when you can get it from OpenStax for free, but nevertheless, you could if you wanted to. The only legal requirement is you have to give attribution, you have to give credit to OpenStax at Rice University. They have books, very high quality textbooks in Stats 101, Psych 101, Biology 101, Chemistry 101. Professors at Anchorage, you don't quite like the way they've done it, hey, it's got an open license on it. Modify it, change it, remix it, take parts of it, take the whole thing, rip out paragraphs, insert new images. You've got the legal rights to do whatever you want to do with it. And so if you want to have some fun at Anchorage, go sit down with your institutional researchers, do a data run of the 100 highest enrolled courses at the University of Alaska at Anchorage. 100 highest enrolled courses. Ask for the enrollments in each course, and then go to the bookstore and find out what the cost of textbooks is for each one of those courses, and multiply the cost of textbook by the enrollments in each course over the course of a year. And your jaw will drop when you see how much money your students are spending in each one of those courses. And if I were advising you, I would say draw a line under maybe row 25 and target those top 25 highest enrolled courses. And those faculty who teach those courses should get together and have a conversation and ask, is there a way that they could either adopt or build or remix existing OER such that they could take the cost of textbooks in those highest enrolled 25 courses to zero? And the answer is yes, of course you can do it. A lot of other institutions are doing exactly that. But it does take time. And if I were, again, coming to your university, I would sit down with your provost and your president, and I would say, if you can get the faculty who teach these 25 courses to agree to do this, you need to support them. And you need to support them with a lot of release time, because that's fundamentally what they need, is they need time. They're going to need additional support, so they're going to need support from the library. You need to have an OER librarian who can help them find what they're looking for to make this easy for the faculty. They're going to need additional instructional design support. They're going to need additional accessibility access support to make sure all the resources are solid. Whatever quality rubric is used at Alaska, whether you use Quality Matters or whatever instructional design best practices you use, you need hardcore instructional design resources to make sure it's exactly what the faculty want. They're going to need some e-learning and technical support, and throw some additional stipend money at them as well, because these are innovators on your campus and they're about to save your students millions of dollars a year. And it's going to be good for your students. It's going to reduce their debt. So this is all data we have from other institutions. It's going to reduce student debt. It's going to decrease time to degree, because your students that have zero textbook costs in their gen ed can afford to take more courses than they could have otherwise afforded to take. The outcomes, the student success, by whatever measure you have in student outcomes for those courses, will go up. Again, we've got significant research to back this. The main reason for that, there's actually two big reasons. One is that 100% of the students in those classes that have open textbooks and other OER, by definition, have 100% of the resources they're going to need to be successful for that class. And for the other sections that have expensive textbooks in, we know from the research 60 to 70% of the students do not buy all the resources for that class. And so it's not a surprise when students are not successful, or as successful as you'd like them to be, when they don't have the resources that you've designed for them to be successful with, right? How can they win if they don't have what you've designed for the class? And so with the OER classes, you see success rates go up. Their scores go up, their competencies, their skills, as compared to non-OER sections. It actually makes the university more tuition money when you move a course to OER, and the reason for that is that fewer students drop out. So you have an add drop period, probably the first 8 weeks, 7-8 weeks. A student can drop a class at your university. If they drop, they don't pay tuition. What we see is that students drop classes because the 60 to 70% who are not buying some of the textbooks get into the class and say, you know textbook, or it's just too expensive and I don't think it's worth it, I'm not going to buy it, and I can already see that I'm going to have a hard time in this class if I don't have all the instructional resources, and because I'm going to have a hard time, I'm not going to do well, so I might as well quit now, and so I'm going to drop out before I have to pay tuition. So that's one of the major factors for why students drop out. When they have everything they need and it's free, they stay in. University makes more money. Once the provost and the president see that, they're much more willing to flood you with resources, both time and money, to transition your course to OER. So these are a lot of the things that are happening in real time. I just left Penn State. I just left University of Manoa at Hawaii, or University of Hawaii at Manoa. I just was 2 days ago. I was with the Oregon Community College System with their community colleges. I'm off to Clemson University and University of Illinois this week. So this is moving like wildfire. So that's just a few examples. We can come back to some others. Another thing, and then I'm going to stop. So the last point I want to make is policy. So another thing that's happening and that I spend about half my time working on is what we call open policy. And open policy, in a nutshell, is we convince people that have money. So usually this is federal governments, national governments, states, foundations, individual philanthropists, and institutions and systems of education. So we convince the people that have the money not to give people money. And when I say don't give them money, I'm talking specifically about discretionary grants, optional grants. I'm not talking about base budgets. So don't give people grants if they won't share what they build. So to put that in a positive way, if you take this money, you'll put a Creative Commons attribution license on whatever you build. So a few examples of that. The Hewlett Foundation just announced that for every grant it gives out from now on, all of its grantees must put a Creative Commons license, a Creative Commons attribution license on what they build. If you don't like those terms, don't go ask Hewlett for a grant. They won't give you one. The U.S. Department of Labor put out $2 billion, so that's billion with a B, put out $2 billion to U.S. community colleges, universities, and their business partners to create new academic programs in job areas where there are jobs and job growth. So green technologies, allied health, advanced manufacturing, IT, etc. And they said if you take any of this $2 billion, anything you build or revise with this money must have a Creative Commons attribution license on it. If you don't like those terms, don't take the money. You don't have to take the money. It's optional. The California Community College System, the Washington Community College System, among others, British Columbia is moving this way, have said if you take discretionary money from the system offices, you will put a Creative Commons attribution license on what you build. So if you want to see the blog post on this, quick one, for those of you who have your computers open, just type in Creative Commons California Chancellor. It'll pop right up. And so if I was, sitting down with your president and provost and your deans, I would say, President of Anchorage, do you have an innovation fund that's your discretionary pot of money that you can fund innovations from year to year? And your president would say, yes, I do, because all presidents have one of those. And I would say, please put a CC BY requirement on the money. So from now on, when you give out that money, whoever takes it and builds something has to share whatever they build, whatever it is, or they can't have the money. And so that's called open policy. Why should you care about that? You should care because it's going to affect your lives in a couple major ways. One is those of you who do academic research, and because Anchorage is the flagship institution in Alaska, you do academic research and you publish. If you haven't seen it already, the press year issued an executive order to all of the largest U.S. federal agencies that was about open access. And it basically said if you take a grant from a U.S. federal agency, NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, Department of Health, NASA, Department of Education, Department of Labor, doesn't matter, any of the big ones that give out research grants. After 12 months of publication, you must publish your article, your academic research, in a place, a location. It can be your institutional repository. It can be PubMed Central at NIH. It can be lots of places. But it has to be freely available to the public that paid for the research to be done, because this was public taxpayer money. And they must be able to access it, not going through a paywall. 12 months after publication. So faculty of Anchorage, you can still publish anywhere you want. It's just that you're going to have to tell the Elsevier Journal, sorry Elsevier, you can't have exclusive rights to this research in perpetuity. After 12 months, it needs to go in an open repository. You're also seeing more and more federal grants that are following the U.S. Department of Labor's lead, and we're helping them do that by saying, if you take this federal grant, you have to put a Creative Commons license on what you build, which, you know, we think, the argument goes, the public should have access to what the public paid for. So with these TACT grants, for example, old model is Georgia gets $20 million from the U.S. Department of Labor to go build a new nursing program, and they don't have to share it with anybody. So that's the way it is today. New model is this new Department of Labor grant, which says Georgia gets $20 million to go build a nursing program, and when it's done, Alaska can take it, no questions asked. You can have it for free, and Alaska can modify it to meet Alaska's needs, and they don't have to pay Georgia a dime, and the U.S. federal government doesn't have to pay for it again. And so from a federal expenditures standpoint, which do you think is a better model? As a taxpayer, would you rather pay for the nursing program once and share it with everybody in the country, or would you rather pay for it 50 times? I mean, those are your choices. And so, so that's what open policy is about. It's the European Union is pushing this hard. Other countries are pushing it hard. Even, you know, very, very small countries like Slovakia, Slovenia. They're both actually involved in OER, but I think Slovakia is the one that's pushing this hard. The president, with our open government partnership, it's a big international partnership around making government more open, is focusing on open educational resources in 2015. So this is coming. So heads up, folks, it's coming. So don't be surprised when you start to see those requirements. But even what I would recommend you do is to have an active OER project or multiple projects at Anchorage, because then you can actually be proactive about this. The next NSF grant or NIH grant or Department of Energy grant that Alaska applies for, it's helpful if in your proposal you say to the Department of Energy, hey, we get it. We understand OER. We're already using Creative Commons licenses, and we want to disseminate and distribute the good work that we're producing. And yes, we want that $5 million grant, Department of Energy, to go figure out better drilling techniques for oil in Alaska. But the research we generate and the courseware we build around new oil drilling techniques, we will share that under an open license. The moment you do that in your proposal, your odds of getting the grant just went through the roof as compared to every other proposal, because the impact, the scalable impact from their perspective just went way up. Because now North Dakota, which is having a bit of an oil boom right now, can benefit from the research in the courseware that you're developing in Alaska. And if North Dakota put in a grant and said anybody, and Alaska put in a grant and said they will share, who do you think the Department of Energy is going to give the grant to? It's going to go to Alaska. All right, so I've talked way more than 10 minutes. I'm going to stop now and turn it back over to Paul.
Gable, awesome. As I mentioned to some of the folks here, this whole topic was a very active area of conversation in Minnesota, so I was happy when Diane and others brought it up as something maybe that we should think about up here at UAA, beginning conversations around that. We've had this in different groups. So in terms of Q&A, I'm going to hold back because obviously I have tons of questions, but it's not fair to dominate. Judy, since you're kind of host, is there a question or something that you might like to kind of throw into the mix? Since CAFE was kind of the one that helped kick off at least the conversation today.
I think you actually answered it somewhat, but I was interested in knowing exactly how many resources were out there for people to use, because, you know, I mean, if there's not a lot out there,
Sure. And maybe as a corollary to that, and if Cable, if you could answer that, what we would find sometimes is a faculty or a dean or a chair or individual K-12 teacher that says, you got me excited, now what? Where can I go? What can I find? How do I begin that process to try to identify those resources? Cable, did you hear that? Did you hear the questions from here?
Yeah, I've got it. So, broadly speaking, how many, let me start with Creative Commons. How many Creative Commons licensed works are out there in the world is a nice place to start. The answer to that is over 1 billion and climbing. So that's billion with a B. And we get that data from Google. Google tracks everything on the web, including CC licensed works. So they know how many are out there, and they tell us. And that's growing exponentially by hundreds of millions a year, and because it's just taking off because of open policies and because of we continue to get more and more Creative Commons integrations in platforms. So, for example, what do you all use at Anchorage for your learning management system? Blackboard or something else?
We're a Blackboard Shop up here right now, Cable.
Okay, so Blackboard, Desire to Learn, Canvas, all these tools have Creative Commons licensing built into the tool. If you upload a video to YouTube, you can tag it with a Creative Commons license. When you upload your pictures to Flickr, you upload your video to Vimeo or to YouTube, you can add a CC license. So because we make it easy to do that, more and more people around the world are doing it. We're about to significantly increase our investments around platform integrations, and we're going to put it on mobile devices as well, because of course mostly what people do for images today is with their phones. So we're going to make it easy so that you can just tell your phone, when I take pictures, I want them to be CC licensed, and when I upload them, carry the license with the image. So it's not going to be a billion. You know, when I talk to you 2 years from now, it's going to be a lot more than that. Let me narrow the scope now down to education. Best one-page resource I can send you to for education is called Find OER. So go to Google and just type in Find OER. It'll be the first link. This is a page that we made for these U.S. Department of Labor grantees who have this requirement to not only use existing OER, but also to share everything they build as a Creative Commons attribution licensed OER. And we built this page to help them find what they're looking for. So they said, gosh, Cable, we were looking for open textbooks. We need open courseware. Sometimes we want whole courses. Sometimes we want parts of courses. We need video. We need audio. We need simulations. We want interactive sims on teaching complex biology, chemistry, other STEM concepts. And so what we did is we put together this page that said, okay, if you're looking for textbooks, here are the 3 sites you want to look at. If you don't know what you're looking for, here's how you use Google to limit your search by Creative Commons license. If you're looking for courses, curriculum, here's where you want to look. You're looking for whole courses, look here. You're looking for parts of courses, oh, here's a good place to look. So we've tried to kind of narrow the universe down to where the best stuff is. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop when we move on to the next question, is Creative Commons realizes that search and discovery of OER and other open stuff is not easy today. We've done a couple of things with the big engines to make it easier, and that's coming along nicely. Those are big metadata projects, but those are going to take a little time for it to catch on, probably a couple of years. And so in the meantime, we're also revamping Creative Commons search. So we're going to, if you go to type in Creative Commons search, you'll see that we've got a search page. It's kind of clunky right now. It's not very good, so I would actually tell you not to use that and instead to go to the Find OER page. But we're revamping CC search to make it a one-stop shop so that you can limit your search by educational resources as well. You'll see that coming in about 6 months, and that'll be a useful resource at that time. In the meantime, use Find OER. It'll get you what you need. I would also say, do not recreate the wheel. So, when you get serious, and again, if you want me to come up and spend a couple days, we can kind of go through this nuts and bolts, have some workshops. I sit down with faculty who are interested in this and librarians, and we actually do this work. We say, all right, let's go find textbooks for your highest enrolled courses. What I do is not only use those tools on Find OER, but we also look at other universities. So those of you who have computers open, type in University of Minnesota open textbooks, or BC Campus open textbooks, or Oregon State University open textbooks, and what you'll see, or college open textbooks. There's all these great sites where you'll see other universities have taken up the torch and the role of curating high-quality open textbooks, just to use one example, and in some cases open courseware, for what the faculty need and want at the University of Minnesota. Now, of course, what the University of Minnesota faculty want, a lot of it's going to be an overlap of what you want at Anchorage. And even better at Minnesota, just to use one of many examples, their faculty are writing reviews of those OER, because, of course, your faculty at Anchorage could care less what I think about a resource. What you really care about is what other physics faculty think about that physics open textbook. And that's exactly right. Faculty should be reviewing and providing advice to other faculty. And so, those are a few examples. Paul, back to you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And Judy, does that kind of...
Yeah.
Laura, I'm going to give you, since you ran through the technical fun and gate setup, you have a question, and then we'll kind of open it up. Really?
Yeah.
No, come on.
Really?
I feel like a fire hose has hit me of information. It's very interesting to see, and it's very exciting, because I know here at UAA we have some technical places where we can, as our faculty are building things, if we have an iTunes View accounts, and we have places that we can look at for best practices for our own publications and what our faculty are creating to share out, on top of looking at more things to bring in. So even bring in remix and share out, right? So we've got a lot of opportunities here. Pretty exciting.
So let's open it up for questions. Yes?
This is fabulous. It's fascinating. I'm really glad that I came. It's pretty clear the winners in this, and there are a lot of them, it seems to be like. My question really has to do, since it's such a sea change, and because I'm used to be a touring singer-songwriter, I know that there are also losers in this, and I'm kind of curious about that. The reason I ask is because you mentioned Spotify, and the losers in that case are the musicians, ironically. And so I'm just kind of curious, whenever we have something big like this happen, there will be losers, and that's just the way the game goes, but I'm curious who you see them be.
Right. Cable, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, I've got it. And whatever that nice lady in the purple shirt's knitting, I want that for my speaking fee. I don't care if it's a scarf, a sweater. I will wear that.
Way to connect with the audience from a distance.
This is what happens when you're on camera. So you're right. There will be losers, and the answer is that it's the for-profit textbook publishers. But it is not the faculty who write textbooks. So that might have been your second question. So so let me put this in perspective. The higher education spend in the United States on textbooks hovers between $8 to $10 billion a year. So that's how much students spend on textbooks in the U.S. every single year, $8 to $10 billion. So the next question is, where does that money come from? And then the other question is, who gets that money? Okay, so let's first say, where does the money come from? It's about a third, a third, a third. So a third of that $8 to $10 billion is federal taxpayer money. So we the taxpayers of the United States of America, pay taxes that go to subsidize staffer loans, that provide Pell Grants. So that's a third, is right there. Another third of the textbook money comes out of state financial aid. So in my state, we call them state need grants, and we have other state financial aid that goes to students. Some of them are grants that they don't have to repay. Some of them are subsidized loans that they do have to pay. But to the extent that they're subsidized, it's tax dollars that are going in to support the loans. And then the other third is either student debt, because they don't have the money to buy the books, or it's cash out of students' pockets or their parents' pockets. And so, so 8 to 10 billion is a big number, but to kind of wrap your head around it, so I used to work in the community colleges in Washington. Our highest enrolled textbook is and was English 101. So English Composition 1, it's a basic writing course that everybody takes. We run 60,000 students a year through English Composition 1. Our students, just in Washington State, just in the community colleges, spend $10.5 million a year on English 101 textbooks. $10.5 million a year. So you break down that, and $3.1 million is coming out of student pockets. $3.1 million is coming right out of the state coffers, state tax money, and $3.1 million you all are helping to pay for it because it's federal tax, Pell Grants, etc. for our students. Thanks, Alaska. We appreciate it. So that's the input of the $8.5 billion. Let's talk about where the money goes. So a lot of people say, well, the losers are going to be the poor faculty who write the books, and they're not going to get hired anymore. That's actually a fairly significant fallacy. So first of all, very few faculty write textbooks, and of the faculty who write textbooks, it's about 1% of them actually make any money doing it. So you might know somebody at Anchorage that writes a book and makes significant money. They are the exception rather than the rule. And so yes, there are the Stewart calculuses. The guy's a multimillionaire. There's, you know, the best-selling biology book in the country. The guy makes $20 million a year on royalties. That's very, very rare, and it's becoming increasingly rare. It's also true that any of the faculty that write textbooks for commercial publishers, they get slightly less than 10% royalties on the sale of the books. Now let's talk about the OER model. So the OER model, so let's go to OpenStax as a good example. OpenStax spends about $500,000 a year, $500,000 building each one of their books, and then they pay, I don't know, 75 grand a year or so in ongoing maintenance for each book. They pay faculty to build those books and to maintain those books, and they're hiring faculty with the support of professional textbook companies with editors and copywriters and graphic artists, etc., to support those authors. They pay them more than the commercial textbook publishers paid them, so they're getting more than the old amount of money they were getting, and the ongoing maintenance is higher, and they give it to all of us for free at no cost. And so one way to think about this is, what's the public spend today on textbooks? And the answer is, it's 2/3 of $8 to $10 billion a year. So let's be conservative and call it $6 billion, right? So do you think that for $6 billion we could come up with a model that would pay faculty, the best faculty in the United States, really, really well? I mean, really pay them well to build educational resources, courses, textbooks, and pay them really well to maintain them. And I'm not talking about one version of Stats 101. I'm talking about 20 versions of Stats 101. And then and put a CC BY license on all of it, a Creative Commons attribution license. And then Alaska faculty can choose to use it or not use it, or take parts of it or modify it. Do whatever you want with it, right? Or don't use it at all. That's your choice. If you want to go spend $175 per book per student, knock yourself out. But others are probably not going to do that. And so, are there losers? Yeah, there are big losers, and they're called Pearson, McGraw, Hill, and others. Same thing with open access. There was an article in Le Monde, in the Paris newspaper yesterday, decrying the existing model of research. So the existing model of research is that the public pays for all the academic research that's done in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. Those are the three big funders in the world of academic research in, you name it, right? Medical research, scientific research of any sort. That's where the money comes from. The United States alone spends $80 billion a year funding academic research. Is this a good thing? Yes, it's a very good thing. We need to cure prostate cancer. We need to come up with better batteries for hybrid cars. All those things are going to come out of the academy and Tesla and other innovators, right? What the problem is today is that when the University of Anchorage faculty get that $6 million grant from NSF to do hybrid battery research, when you publish your research to an Elsevier journal, what does Elsevier ask you to do? Not ask, require. They require that you sign your copyright over to this Dutch company, Elsevier. Nothing against the Dutch, I love the Dutch, but The United States taxpayers have paid for that research on battery technology. It has now been exported off our shores. We no longer own any of that research. And what does the University of Alaska Library have to do to get you the legal rights to access that research that your University of Anchorage faculty wrote? You have to subscribe to the journal. And what happens if you don't subscribe to the journal? You can't access it. And so the crazy thing is your faculty in your engineering department who got that $6 million NSF grant, which we, the public of the United States, paid for, if your library, through budget cuts, had to cut that journal, it's actually against U.S. copyright law and international treaties around copyright. It's against the law for your University of Anchorage faculty to use her research in her class with her students. If she does that, she could get sued by Elsevier and she would lose. So that's the environment we have. Who loses by open access mandates? Elsevier does. Should you feel bad for Elsevier? No. Elsevier's profit margin last year was 36%. That means after all their expenses, their profit was 36 cents on the dollar. To put that in perspective, Apple's profit margin last year was less than 5%. So don't feel bad for companies that are living off the backs of public educators and public funds and have made a very good living doing it, and kudos to them for coming up with those business models. But we should not feel any worse for them than we felt for the ice cutting industry when refrigeration was invented. Technologies have moved us on to better models, and we should take advantage of them if we want to decrease the cost of education and increase access and quality.
Ice cutting is a little close to home.
like I said, there were actually people whooping in the audience in Minnesota at this point. So, other questions for Cable? Yes.
I think one of my problems I work with the library, and actually I have two questions. One is, who put up the money to, you said it was $1 million something to get the textbooks published. I think I missed where that financing came from. And why would we expect it to continue? So I agree that the publishing textbook market is bloated. However, there are costs because you had to pay to have those. So, you know, I guess I see a publishing model that's bloated on the academic and the textbook, and I think open access, I'm coming from open source software, there's always hidden costs of supporting it. So I guess what I'd like to see is just a market adjustment to a more reasonable cost model, and that can play a role in it.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So there's something called gold open access, which is seeking to do exactly what you just said, which is to move to, yes, there are still costs, but to move to a reasonable model that's not, you know, that's not offensive in terms of profit margins. So a good example of that is the Public Library of Science. So the Public Library of Science is a series of journals, very well-respected journals in the fields, especially of biology and other medical fields. PLOS One is a huge journal. And instead of charging for subscription fees to the journals, what they charge are submission fees or publication fees. So there's still a peer review process. There's still a quality vetting in the same way that you know, they still have your peers review your work, your submissions, and either your work makes it through that gauntlet or it doesn't, in the same way that it would at an Elsevier journal. But when they have accepted your journal, they don't require you to turn over your copyright. What they say is there are some costs we have to pay our people, and there are some, you know, website costs, etc. And there's a publication fee, and that publication fee is you know, a couple $100, and you pay that fee, and that goes to help cover their costs. And then the quid pro quo is that you get to keep your copyright, and you have to agree to publish your article under a Creative Commons attribution license so that everybody in the world can have access to it. Now, more and more researchers around the planet are saying, you know what? That's a much better idea, because as a researcher, I want to be read. I want to matter. I want to have impact. I want to, you know, I don't want my good work, my research, to go into a journal and nobody can read it because people have stopped subscribing to it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I just had a breakthrough here in battery technology or in new oil drilling techniques. I want people to know about this. I mean, that's what education and research is about, right? There's an interesting study that came out 2-3 months ago in the Chronicle of Higher Ed that showed that because there are so many journals out there and so many articles being written, and more of them are too expensive and libraries are not subscribing to the journals, the new average number of reads per article, meaning how many people read the article that you wrote, is less than 3. So think about that for a minute. I'm a researcher. I've gotten this big federal grant to do the research, and less than 3 people read my research. I mean, that's appalling. Now, in contrast, open access articles, where there is no cost barrier to access the article, those are read 15 times more on average. So on average, the reads are 45 times instead of 3. Now, as a researcher, as an author, as a professor, which do you prefer? Right? If you're not read, you're not known, you're not cited, and B, nobody knows, so it doesn't matter. It's like, it's the old adage, if you don't hear the tree fall in the woods, did it fall? Well, if you're a researcher and nobody reads your research, does your research matter? I would say no, right? You have to be read, you have to have an impact. And if you want to do that today, you do it by being open. Because if your stuff is freely accessible, people will read it. They will read it all over the planet. Same thing true with if you have a textbook and you make it open, you put an open license on it, more people will use your textbook than would have otherwise used your textbook. Now, if you're somebody at Anchorage that has a deal with Pearson and you're making 20 grand a year in royalties on your textbook, I would say keep doing that. No, do not put a CC license on your book. You're making a lot of money. I would venture a guess that there are very few of those people at the University of Anchorage.
The second, good answer. The second part is, I didn't really think, I came here because of the Creative Commons part of the licensing, and suddenly I'm hearing that, we need a EO librarian, and I'm like, really? Well, what are they going to do? So what role does the librarian play?
Actually, I was just going to raise that, given the fact there are a number of library folks, and it's been a very active conversation in some of the R states I work with. So, Cable?
I'd also add on to that, I'd like to know if you can give us the names of some that we can contact and talk to them.
Cool.
Yeah, so, and I apologize, this is going to have to be my last question because I've got a meeting with a big company to integrate Creative Commons into their platform, so I'm already 7 minutes late for that. But just to reiterate the offer, my uncle lives right down the street from you guys, so I'm happy to come up. And he has one of those little bush planes, and he takes me fishing, so I'll really come up. So invite me in like June. I want to come in June or July.
Oh, here.
Problem, in fact, we aren't here.
We'll meet you at the lake.
Don't make me come in January where there's 3 hours of sunlight a day. I've done that before too. So ask me the question again. Creative Commons and libraries role, and how do you find stuff? So do you need a special OER librarian? No. All right, everything I've said you can go out and do tomorrow. Why do I emphasize librarians? Because on any campus, on any university or community college campus, it's the library, and especially your research librarians, who know how to find stuff better than anybody else. Nobody like a research librarian can get on the web and say, what are you looking for? I mean, they just know how to use the Boolean search terms. They know how to use Google filters. They know where stuff is better than pretty much anybody else on your campus. So they're good. They're really great for that. They also tend to be the copyright experts on your campus, the librarians and the lawyers. But the librarians are much more fun to work with. No offense to any lawyers who are in the room. But the librarians, they understand copyright law. They understand open access. They understand why open access journals and publications are important. They understand open educational resources. They get licensing. They deal with licensing all the time. They understand fair use. We haven't talked about fair use today, but adding copyrighted resources, even if they don't have a CC license on them. The librarians are the ones who go give sessions on that. We see oftentimes they are the leaders of not only open access but also OER. And my advice, whenever you have me come up, what I'll do is I'll, insist that we have meetings with not just the faculty and the deans and the president and the provost and the student leadership and the bookstore you know, and the instructional design team and the e-portfolio team and the e-learning group, but also the librarians. And usually I ask that the librarians are in most of those other meetings as well, because they tend to be bridges across campus with a lot of these groups, because they're traditionally the holders of the content, the holders of the knowledge. That's what a library is. And the libraries, you know, over the past 5 years have been going through the, kind of this crisis mode of, you know, what's our new role in a world of digital resources, of reduced stacks, increased space in our libraries. You know, they're really changing, which is good. They should change. But with that, they're seizing the UAA and OER as well. So do you need your own OER librarian? No. But I can tell you that the institutions that do have OER librarians are leapfrogging everybody else, because they're taking advantage of that natural state of the library to be great connectors and friends of faculty and supporters of faculty. Because ultimately, bottom line on all this stuff, if faculty don't want to change their textbook, they're not going to change it. If faculty don't want to use OER from outside the institutions, they're not going to do it. If faculty don't want to CC license their work, they're going to tell you to take a hike, right? It's their choice. Academic freedom reigns supreme, as it should. And so if you want faculty to make those changes, you have to talk with faculty. You have to, you know, persuade them that this is something they might consider. You have to support them. A lot of faculty say, hey, I get it. Like, this is great, but I'm not moving to some schlock textbook that hasn't been vetted, that I haven't had the time to update, that I haven't had the time to revise, that I don't trust because my colleagues have reviewed it. I need support. I need time. And so, you know, you got to flood them with resources. And when you do that, the faculty, not all of them, but most of them shift. And once they shift, not only they're really happy to save their students a lot of money, and their students are thrilled. But what faculty really thrive on, especially with OER, is they're so thankful that for the first time they've got the legal rights to do exactly what they want with their resources. And they're just thrilled that they don't have to ask anybody's permission, and their stuff isn't out of date anymore. I mean, you know, faculty at Anchorage have all had the experience of finding errors or outdated information in their textbooks, and they've contacted their publisher rep, and their publisher rep has said, hey, thanks for letting us know, and that's the end of it. Or maybe a step better, the publisher said, hey, thanks for letting us know, we'll put that in the next version of the textbook, and the faculty said, great, when's that going to be? And the rep said, 2 years from now, or 18 months from now. And you as faculty said, that's not good enough. I want it changed for Monday's class. And with OER, you just change it for Monday, right? And so it's just better. Faculty also see their students doing better in their courses because 100% of your students have 100% of the resources that you designed for the class. You see better retention. You see all these key performance indicators across the institution get better. And faculty also, last comment that I really have to run, what we see is that faculty are actually reinvigorated and get really excited about the content they have in the course because they themselves have had some time that the university has given them some release time to actually redesign the course, redesign the content, get their hands dirty in a textbook and make it exactly how they want it. And then this is the really exciting part, is that faculty redesign the assignments and the assessments for their students. So old model is, hey students, here's the syllabus, here's a bunch of assignments, you know, you want your A, you got to do all these things really well. You turn in the assignment to me, the faculty member, I'll grade it, I'll give it back to you, you get your grade, you throw it away, I'll throw it away, and we move on through the syllabus. And I'm being, you know, I'm overreaching here to make my point. New model, new open pedagogy, new set of open practices is, hey students, all the content in this course is OER. What that means is I've taken the best stuff from around the planet that I can find, I've remixed it, I've changed it, I've modified it, I've put my own stuff in. This course, this textbook, is as good as I can make it today as your faculty member. It's really good, but educational content can always be better. Research can always be tested and retested. We can always falsify somebody else's hypotheses. Textbooks can always be made better. It can be made more up to date. Your assignment, students, in this class, your assignment, Jake, is to rewrite Chapter 2, because this is a course on political science, and since this book has been published, the Crimean Peninsula and the Ukraine boundaries have changed slightly in the last 6 months. And the sphere of influence of Russia is now different than it was when this textbook was published. Go fix Chapter 2. Go rewrite what Russia is doing in the Middle East and why they care about a warm water port on the Mediterranean. By the way, your work is not only going to be seen by everybody else in your class and by me, but even more important, future cohorts of University of Alaska Anchorage students are going to use this book. So next semester, they're going to use your Chapter 2. And I'm going to share this poli-sci textbook with everybody else on the planet. And so I've just raised the bar of how important it is that you do a really good job and properly cite and don't plagiarize and do your very best work, because other people are going to be learning you what right. And when you do that, and faculty who are teaching with OER are starting to do that, the students go crazy. They get really excited because it's meaningful. It's an authentic task. When it was just an assignment that I turned into you, I don't really care. I mean, yeah, I want my A, but you're going to throw it away. I'm going to throw it away. It doesn't really matter. It mattered for my head. I learned something. But if you're telling me that what I'm doing actually has impact on a lot of other learners, all of a sudden I'm going to work a heck of a lot harder. So that's what's truly exciting about OER and what we're seeing shifting in people's classrooms. Sorry, I have to run. Call me if you want me to come up to Anchorage. I'm happy to come.
Campbell, you're awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the sunlight while you have it.
Thank you.
Judy, thank you for hosting. The only mistake we ever did with Cable is he agreed to do workshops after his keynote, and we heard from every other presenter that was up against him in those workshops. Don't do that to me next time, because we allow people that came in and like you guys did. What they wanted to do was the Q&A. And I want to do this, where do I get it? Cable's very good on follow-up, by the way, so if you want lists